KwaZulu-Natal is still picking up the pieces following the devastating floods. It is expected to cost billions to restore infrastructure, but even if the funds materialise, it could take months, if not years, to rebuild. For more on this conversation, I'm joined by Simbarashe Garaba, lead of strategic projects at Mariswe. Simba, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you, Hugo. Good evening.
Now, Premier of KZN, Kalala, has said it will take many months, if not years, to reconstruct some aspects of the devastation that's been caused in KZN. Talk us through why would it take so long? What is just the nature of that devastation?
All right. Thank you, Hugo. Firstly, if the images behind me, I'm sure you can see them, right? The devastation was very dire, all right? It stretched from as far off as Mapumulo in the north, if not further, and further down south to the south coast. We've had situations where roads were washed away, where bridges broke off, and in some instances, it's not only repair work that's necessary. There's reconstruction work that needs to take place, and that takes quite a long time. Now, at this stage, people cannot go to school. People cannot go to their places of employment. We have situations where we have people not earning a living. People's livelihoods have been broken apart. And it's necessary that we invest time into this.
Now, when we watched many of the videos, and certainly some of the reports that we covered, certainly remember one of our reporters, Karinda Jagmohan, out in KZN, and literally the earth had caved in, leaving a massive cliff, if you will. I mean, what is the sort of work that goes into rebuilding that? Can you, or do you just sort of leave it?
All right, thanks. To start, all right, we definitely need to do a risk assessment, right, because we still have properties that are close to these sinkholes. So we need to bring in geotechnical engineers as well as structural engineers to firstly protect what's around that area, all right, so that we don't have further loss of life or further loss of infrastructure. The second thing, when we look at sinkholes, the basic premise around it is that we want to stabilize everything from the bedrock going up. So the idea is to open these sinkholes, stabilize it based on what we get from our geotechnical engineer, be it using in situ material, be it we need to put in aggregate for future drainage purposes. In some cases, you can actually fill them up with concrete. So all these are potential solutions, but all of them are site-specific. That's why we need to bring in our geotech engineers.
Well, there were conversations, certainly, that were doing the rounds about how ill-prepared the government of KZN was. I think one of the allegations was that drainage, for instance, contributed to the flooding. In your own assessment, was this an issue?
It definitely was. All right. Flooding tends to compound on itself. All right. But it's unfair to just mention that drainage was the issue. We also have a situation where we have informal settlements. All right. And these informal settlements are staying below the flood line. And when water rushed through those informal settlements, we had people's shacks, and some of these are made of corrugated iron. And as they hit bridges or road crossings over streams, we ended up with makeshift dams.
So let me come in there. You talk about a flood line. Now, for the person that's currently watching Newzroom Afrika and doesn't understand what a flood line is, what is it, and what is its impact?
Okay. A flood line is basically a level that we have above the stream, above the rivers, where we know that a 1 in 50-year flood or 1 in 100-year flood can get to this point. And as a result, you're not allowed to build there. Now, based on socio-political issues or socio-economic issues that we're not going to get into in this discussion, people stay there in informal settlements. A study that I was looking at earlier, before sitting with you, said that a quarter of the people in Durban itself, stay in informal settlements, which is obviously wanting to be as close as possible to earning potential. So as a result, you find people staying in these floodlines. And when water hits, that debris becomes makeshift bridges. We end up with water on our roads that we had not planned for. We end up these makeshift bridges result in water rising upstream, affecting other homes, and then it compounds on itself. But there is definitely an issue of maintenance, because when our drainage is designed, it's designed in 100 to 150 year floods, and if we don't maintain these, if we don't maintain our drainage systems, right? Now we have sand in these drains. If it's not able to do what it's supposed to because it doesn't get maintained, it either doesn't work or it fails completely.
That's about water and sanitation are a key lifeline for people, as is communication infrastructure. Now, how does the KZN government prioritize? Because I'd imagine that they can't do everything all at the same time.
That's an interesting one, Hugo. Water and sanitation is a basic human right. All right. Before we get to roads and all these things, water and sanitation is a basic human right. So the KZN government will be prioritizing water and sanitation. However, Hugo, it's not that simple. It's not black and white. All right. We have situations where, for instance, if we look at the road between the port and the N3 that was damaged, that's a strategic road, right? Goods and product needs to move inland. So that is a priority, right? At the same time, you also need roads to access certain areas where water and sanitation is required. So you can see that it's a delicate balance. But luckily as built environment professionals and civil engineers and the rest of the guys within the built environment, we've got enough scope to be able to handle these things in parallel. So it's not one over the other. As much as water and sanitation prioritizes human life, sometimes we actually need to build roads to be able to go provide temporary water and sanitation and accommodation.
Now, you talk about infrastructure being built to deal with 1 in 50 year, 1 in 100 year floods, right?
Yes.
Now, KZN had floodings, I think, almost 8 weeks ago, if I'm correct. And then 3 or 4 weeks ago, they had floods yet again. So there is the infinite possibility that floods may be recurring in KZN because of climate change, for instance. So how do we foolproof against the challenges that we've faced in this rather terrible season?
All right. That question requires a multi-pronged response because it's not a straight line situation, right? So I'll break it down in 4 themes. All right. One being accommodation and settlements, the other being planning, environmental, and bulk infrastructure. Right. When we look at bulk infrastructure, I spoke about maintenance. That's where maintenance comes in. That's where the fact that we are repairing bulk infrastructure to get back to where we were, not to make it better, to prevent more flooding. If you look at the South African Weather Service's report, I think they talk about how extrapolated over time these floods are going to be happening more frequently, right? But our goal is to get we're trying to get back to where we were and not actually better our infrastructure. Yeah. Right. That together with the idea of maintenance. When we look at accommodation, that's what I touched on in terms of we have people living below the flood line. Yeah. Chances are the flooding has stopped now. People have gone back there. Again, those socio-economic issues. So people are definitely back there. So if we have flooding in December in the next rainy season, those guys are going to be affected, no doubt. So that's what we need to address when we're talking about addressing the issue of flood lines under accommodation. It's important to understand that we need to have better communication. Right, the people that were affected most there were the people and homes that are affected most were the people that were that don't have high earning potential in our society. Yeah. So we need localized communication. As much as we say radio is something that everyone listens to, these guys need community leaders to actually go down, and we're able to predict this. We're able to predict weather. At least 2-3 days, we know when the risk is high. But we need these guys in these communities addressing these particular risks in addition to regulation.
Simbarashe, we're going to have to call time on the conversation, but certainly appreciate you coming into the studio this evening. Simbarashe Garaba, lead strategic project at Mariswe, and that conversation around how the reconstruction of KZN